this month, the Hip Hop Caucus held a rally for the cancellation of student debt, and we streamed it right here across ACT.TV platforms. Hip Hop Caucus, in case you didn't know, is an organization that connects the hip hop community, that is 14 to 40-year-olds, so I'm out, who identify with hip hop culture and share values of justice and equity, bringing these people to the political process to build power and to create change. So President Joe Biden had made his campaign promise for the relief of student debt. The Hip Hop Caucus came together to pressure him to act, shall we say, more robustly on his promise. Let's take a look at what Biden said when he was still on the campaign trail. Roll it, Phil.
Verify, did President Biden pledge to forgive federal student debt loan? Our sources are Joe Biden's 2020 campaign website, the White House Communications Office, Federal Reserve Economic Data, Federal Student Aid, and the U.S. Department of Education. During the campaign, President Biden said his job and the economic recovery agenda would focus on providing relief from student debt.
I'm prepared to write off the $10,000 debt.
His 2020 campaign website confirms his plan to cancel a minimum of $10,000 of federal student loan debt. He also went as far as to say he'd forgive all undergraduate tuition-related federal student debt from public colleges and universities and private HBCUs for people making up to $125,000 per year. So, yes, we can verify President Joe Biden has previously pledged to forgive at least $10,000 of federal student loan debt for each borrower.
What about the students? Is now a time to forgive student debt and then restructure how we pay for college so we're not here again in 10 years?
The answer is yes. That's why I proposed and the House, Nancy, put it in the plan to immediately provide $10,000 in debt relief as stimulus right now for students. A minimum of $10,000 relief.
You get all these degrees, you end up with all this debt, and you're in a position where you can't get a job because no one's hiring, or if they're hiring at very low wages. And so what we have to do is we have to make sure that you get the opportunity. That's why I'm going to eliminate a lot of your student debt if you, in fact, if you come from a family less than 125 grand and you went to a public university. I'm going to make sure that everybody in this generation gets $10,000 knocked off of their student debt as we try to get out of this god-awful pandemic.
There you go. Those were his promises made on the campaign trail. Now let's talk about what he did. So far, Biden has canceled $15 billion in student loans. That is more than any other president, and more than 675,000 student loan borrowers have benefited. He's doing it through specific plans. The borrower defense to repayment, $1.5 billion was canceled there. The total and permanent disability folks, $7 billion canceled there. ITT Tech students got $1.3 billion in forgiveness, and the public service loan forgiveness got $5 billion. Biden has also extended temporary student loan relief 3 times for a total of 15 months. His extensions of student loan relief collectively would have saved us, and I guess I still consider myself a student if you have a student loan. Anyway, student loan borrowers, approximately $75 billion in student loan interest. But people are still suffering, and the economy is not offering opportunities to get out from under these predatory loans. And so far, student loan cancellation has benefited only about 1.5% of student loan borrowers and less than 1% of outstanding student loan debt. So basically not enough. Biden said he's ready to cancel student loans for millions of borrowers. Again, he said up to $10,000. They said in that video a minimum of $10,000, also a maximum of $10,000 for Biden, and that he would sign any student loan cancellation legislation that Congress sends him. Is this a punt? Congress hasn't passed any wide-scale student loan forgiveness, and likely won't either, because some corporate Dems won't support it, and no Republicans. I mean, we didn't even ask them. It was just probably a non-starter. So anyway, the administration is saying they don't believe Biden has the authority, the executive authority, to enact wide-scale student loan cancellation without further authorization from Congress. He is not a king, after all, and there are some structures remaining in place that limit executive authority, thank goodness. Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, backs him up, saying that the president doesn't have the authority to cancel those loans unilaterally without Congress. Even if the president could use an executive order to forgive student loan debt, which he cannot, according to Forbes and other people, there are regulations that would prevent any president from forgiving the student loan debt of borrowers who are able to repay their student loans, quote, within a reasonable period of time. Is the 40-year plan reasonable? I'm asking for a friend. But Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Senator Elizabeth Warren believe he can just cancel it by executive order. And they have called on the president to immediately forgive $50,000 per borrower. So what's the reality here? Who knows? There's some further shadiness. Last year, Biden called on the U.S. Department of Education to prepare a report on Biden's legal authority, or lack thereof, to outright forgive student debt. Yes, last year. And guess what? It's done. And it's just been sitting there. I mean, he's at least been looking into it, but currently the report is almost completely redacted. In fact, 80 Congresspeople sent the Biden administration a letter just last week saying, excuse me, could we see what's in this report so we can move ahead? All of this raises questions. Who redacted the report? Does the report say Biden can do it and he doesn't want anyone to know this because he's beholden to corporate interest? Is Pelosi right that Biden can't legally forgive loans? Are Schumer and Warren just posturing with their $50,000 forgiveness ask, knowing that he can't do it? What does Bernie say? I don't want to turn into Tucker Carlson, who just asks questions and doesn't give any answers. But what I do know is that the effect these loans are having on working people, well, it's bad. First of all, I know it because I live it. And second of all, because the Hip Hop Caucus action really brought home the enormous effect these predatory debts are having on borrowers. Here is Reverend Lennox Yearwood, the president of the Hip Hop Caucus, on the effects of student debt and how it is destroying communities and worse.
There are Americans who have now committed suicide because they no longer can take the toll of the student loan debt crisis on them. We have $1.6 trillion in debt across this country. We have literally hundreds of thousands of Americans, black, white, brown, red, male, female, straight, gay, who are struggling under debt in this country, and we are doing nothing.
That again was Reverend Yearwood. He is the president of the Hip Hop Caucus. Up next from that event that happened in Washington, D.C. earlier this week is another woman, Shakya Cherry Donaldson, the director of 1,000 Women Strong, who talks about how the current extension of relief simply isn't enough.
Economic
and she makes
burden of
a
student
little
loan debt.
Well, you can hear her in her own words. Go ahead.
Under this economic burden of student loan debt, we are being crushed. Our dreams are being crushed, our possibilities are being squandered, and our potential is really being cut short. Because without student loan debt cancellation, we are living under the burden of constant debt. I cannot tell you the amount of calls I got in early December when the letters started going back out. People were freaking out. People all across the country. I thought you said they were going to help us. I thought you said this was going to be over. What is happening? As we were going into the holidays and this Omicron variant, people saw no way out. So while they gave us an extension, it is still an extension for the relief. It is still not a solution. And we are here to be solution-oriented people. And the only solution that we'll take now is demanding $50,000 of student loan debt cancellation for all eligible borrowers now. It needs to happen before the moratorium ends. It needs to happen before this midterm cycle. It needs to happen right now. It needs to happen for the millions of Americans, including Black women, predominantly Black women that hold 2/3 of this $1.6 trillion debt as the most educated subdivision in this country. If you trust Black women, trust us now and cancel this debt and allow us to continue to live and liberate our communities and ourselves.
I mean, that figure was again astounding and astonishing that 2/3 of the debt is held by Black women. I think it's important that we all bear in mind and perhaps remind people who would not be necessarily for canceling student debt that when you're educated, you add to society. It's not necessarily about people getting for themselves. You cannot add to society while you're crippled with debt. And so everyone pays for people not being able to contribute to society and live up to their potential. I mean, the debt is another way to keep people in bondage. A spokesperson for the White House said the president continues to look into what debt relief actions can be taken administratively. But the next speaker, Ms. Vines, from the founder of Live Movement, she spoke of the bipartisan practice of breaking campaign promises and urges Biden to act more robustly and not incrementally on his word. Let's take a listen.
My message today is very simple, and it's not just to Joe Biden, but it is also to our Vice President, Kamala Harris, my fellow Bison. Do your job. It is very simple. The message has been clear. We have been screaming the same things since before 2020. There are things and systems that have been put in place consistently to oppress Black people in America. And I'll be very honest. I had an interview yesterday, and we talked about cancellation of student loan debt. And they asked, were you surprised? Are you surprised that Joe Biden went back on his word? Are you surprised that he cut the budget that he promised during his campaign from $43 billion to $2 billion for HBCU students? I said, absolutely not. I'm not surprised. I'm not, because we have learned, and if we haven't, I really hope that we do as American citizens, especially as Black people. Politicians are going to say whatever they need to get into their positions of power. And then when they secure that position of power, they're going to work on their own personal vendettas. This has been proven. This has been a trend. This has been a culture. They made these promises because it sounded good. It sounded sweet. They wanted us to flood those polls. And to be very clear, a majority of the students that went to the polls was not pro-Biden. It was anti-Trump. Let's keep it real. We were trying to get people out of the White House. So now that we have Joe Biden, what we are trying to ask him to do, what we are demanding for him to do, is to do his job. But to be very clear, my message to Black and brown people, not just in the DMV area, but across the nation, we need to figure out how to mobilize as one and lessen our dependency on the federal government and more dependency on our people, on the community. How are we going to mobilize? How are we going to strategize behind the scenes so that we no longer have to look to Joe Biden as he continues to make false promises, or look to Kamala Harris that says, okay, our American arms are open for people, and then say, okay, never mind, go home once she makes it through those double doors? What we have to do is figure out a way as Black people, knowing our power and knowing the strength in numbers and just the power that we literally have taken and kept since we came to America across the transatlantic slave trade, and figure out what does it look like if we no longer depended on the government. So right now, in my 21 years of living, I have understood, and I do recognize this: the promises that are made by those that sit in these positions of power in the government, they are usually false. Let that really sink into people. I understand the faith that we continue to try to have in the government, but let's look historically at what they have fallen through on and what they have promised. Does it line up?
I mean, we could look at that all day, but yes, basically on this issue, the Biden administration has, they haven't exactly come through, and they need to find a way to unilaterally cancel student debt, be it $10,000 per borrower, $50,000 as Warren and Schumer seek, or the Bernie canceled the whole $1.7 trillion shebang and tell Sally Mae to stick it where the sun don't shine bill, number 85777. Anyway, something needs to be done, and it needs to happen fast. Coming up to discuss this and other economic-related topics, my interview with Professor Richard Wolff, the host of Economic Update. Stay tuned. You're watching ACT TV.